Hello, hello, hello. Hum hai Auratein Dil Se Desi, a podcast for brown women by brown women. I'm your host, Geet, and with me is your co-host, Amna. And we have a special guest today, Jahan Ara Chuktai. You can find her on Instagram at Pakistani Therapist. I've been following her for quite some time now, and I find her words wise, inspirational, and oftentimes uplifting. I hope you will find her to be the same. Today, in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, and in response to the overwhelming request from our listeners, we will be starting a special mini-series on mental health. We will be inviting different guests from different backgrounds to share their expertise. We encourage you to please submit your questions for the experts on our Instagram page or website directly. Our Instagram page is at 3AURATEN, and our website is www.auraten.com. And now on to our episode.
Hi, everyone, whoever is listening. My name is Jahan Ara Chuktai. I am a psychotherapist in Lahore, Pakistan. I did my master's in mental health counseling from the University of Rochester, New York. So I went on the Fulbright in 2019. And over there, a majority of my work where I interned and I worked was at a domestic violence shelter by the name of Willow in the Rochester area. So I had a lot of initial training on trauma-informed care, and a majority of my clients were people who were coming in from domestically violent homes. So we had a shelter, and then there was a counseling center there, and I worked at the counseling center. At school, I was training a lot into emotion-focused work. I took a lot of courses on it. I had supervision on it. So an area of interest of mine. And at Willow, we were using more strength-based trauma-informed work. So I've had a mixture of different kinds of trainings. So I worked with different kinds of populations in the US. So Black women, Muslim women, Hispanic women, white women, all different kinds of people who were coming from domestic violence backgrounds. And in Pakistan, I work with a lot of people who have very difficult and deep-rooted trauma histories. I've worked with people who've been gang raped, childhood rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, things of the sort. So it's mostly an area that has become my niche over time. So yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, can you tell us a little bit about what is trauma-informed therapy?
I love this question, so I'm going to try to make it within this podcast time limit. So I think trauma-informed therapy is someone who has a good understanding of what it means to have trauma, what it trauma being trauma-informed means understanding that all of us have trauma histories. Being trauma-informed means understanding that 1 in 3 people, they have a deep trauma history. So something that the listeners might not be aware of is if you're really interested in trauma and how this works, you can Google ACEs. So people don't know what the ACEs score is. So it's Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. That's ACEs. That's ACES. So a lot of high ACEs scores are found in the population, and we don't pay them as much attention as is perhaps needed. Being trauma informed means understanding the choices of survivors. I think last night I started watching the season on Netflix called Made, which is about domestic violence, and I was bawling watching it as a domestic violence counselor. And I reached out to my supervisor. I was like, Morgan, have you seen it? And she was like, girl, that is the reason I'm not watching it yet,
Yeah,
because
I
I was
watched it.
bawling watching it as well. You watched it?
Yeah, I watched it. It was horrible and heart-wrenching. And so
Yes.
many brown
And I
women go
think as
through
a
that.
counselor, oh, yes. So I haven't finished it yet, but it's just more like understanding the choices of survivors, like people going back or not leaving. I think there's so much stigma on, Ocha, your partner's abusive, so why are you staying? How stupid of you. And I'm like, they're not understanding this whole context of, what's happening for the survivor there, because we're just looking at it from the surface level, the surface of the ocean. There's many layers that the ocean has underneath. So just paying attention to those. So I think someone who's trauma informed understands survivors' choices, is not victim blaming. I have heard and worked with practitioners, and my clients tell me about practitioners who have mentioned, well, if your family member was, and also trigger warning, if you do find yourself feeling triggered, please kind of zone out, you feel free to pause and come back to the podcast whenever you'd like to. Someone's family member was consistently raping them for a bunch of years. And then when they went to this therapist, I remember that my client was telling me, the therapist was like, well, you never said no. How were they supposed to know you weren't liking it?
Wow.
And I mean, there are things like these that you hear, which is not trauma informed. And I think I will also kind of preface this, and I do want to mention that from what counselors understand, they're always trying to come from a place of, I want to help my client. But if the counselor has never been trained in trauma, doesn't have exposure enough, even if they're coming from a place of good intention, they can cause a lot of deep rooted harm. Because when this client came to me, I couldn't see that they'd been going to therapy for बिल्कुल लग ही नहीं रहा था कि वो 3 साल से शायद therapy में थे. They were very dysregulated and very re-traumatized. And based on what they were telling me about their previous practitioner, I could understand why as well. So I think being trauma informed is a lot about understanding choices, understanding. I think the narrative is very popular on how we speak about trauma is stored in the body. So understanding that sort of body awareness, and I work with clients with a lot, focusing on the body as well. That's being trauma informed, right? But I think if you're going out and you're getting any kind of mental health support in Pakistan or another country, you want to make sure you can ask your practitioner, how do you view trauma? What is your definition of it? What are your ideas of it? And that is your right as a counselor to ask them. When I speak about these things with people here, they're like, oh, rude to nahi lagega कि हम question कर रहे हैं शायद उनकी qualification. I'm like, this is not rude at all. This is your right. आप पूछें कि आपकी क्या training है trauma में, या आपको क्या पता है. And not like in a more like, rude way, but just like, it's your right. You can absolutely ask them, like, what's your training? Because Geet, even being trauma informed is going to be very different for different practitioners. Right. So for me, trauma ki ye definition hai, this is the lens, or this is the training that I've had where I see this. For other people, it can be very different. And this doesn't mean that one is less or more effective than the other. But it's important to see if your trauma definitions are something that match with your mental health practitioner.
So, is it safe for me to say that trauma informed care would be some kind of the way that you approach therapy with the patient is to kind of avoid them reliving those past traumas? Is that safe to say? So that, or challenging?
In one way, yes. So in one way, yes. But then I also practice something called EMDR therapy, which can be pretty re-traumatizing because you're actually bringing up the traumatic memories and we're like, let's process it, let's go with it. But it's about, without good reason, like there has to be a reason why we're having someone recall their trauma. Or there's a lot of trauma therapy में हम कहते हैं pendulation, like हम जाएंगे trauma पे हम वापस आ जाएंगे, फिर हम जाएंगे फिर हम वापस आ जाएंगे. So we're kind of building your body's capacity to take it in, right? I'm not just going to be like अभी इसी चीज में सारे 60 minutes में बताओ क्या हुआ था. Even with जो हमें सिखाई जाती थी intakes जब हम करते हैं, ठीक है, intakes में we are taught कि we gotta manage the intake in a way that, hey, if this question is uncomfortable and if you don't feel like answering this question, you let me know. I'm not gonna ask it in the intake. यहाँ पे मुझे बताएं अबू के साथ क्या हुआ था, फलाने के साथ, it's just like, my God, you could really re-traumatize and dysregulate someone by or intake hoti bhi actually एक बहुत difficult चीज है for any kind of person. Trauma history, no trauma history, because you're like tell me about your life in like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult. And it's I do consultation calls with clients, so they're kind of shorter where I try to get an understanding. And trauma informed care is, I always preface it, if at some point there's a point that you don't want to mention to me or you don't feel comfortable mentioning, don't mention it. We'll come back to it later. No worries. Or things like, let's have a stop sign. If I mention something or if I say something that is difficult, just tell me, Jahana, let's just stop here, वापस आ जाते हैं, let's talk about something. Or you notice yourself, I have a lot of people with dissociation. So if you notice yourself dissociating or speaking about something where you notice that your mind is piche ja raha hai, things are getting blurry, just give me this is like a stop sign. Or they tell me somehow, okay, let's come back. That's trauma-informed care. That's understanding where your client's coming from. That's giving them lots of space to have autonomy. One of the biggest things that trauma takes away from you, just may harm responsibility, safety, and control. We have to work with 3 of these themes when we're looking at someone who has been snatched of autonomy, responsibility, control, safety, all of these things. When I ask the client, I have people who come in and I'm like, is the lighting okay for you? You know, how do you want the light? Do you want me to turn off a lamp, switch on a lamp? What do you want? And they're like, you know what? Actually, this lighting's nice, but I want to turn that lamp on. Okay, sure. Then I kind of ask them, because I like to work a lot with here and now and body recognition. How do you know you like that lamp sensation? They're like, oh, I don't know, it felt good. I'm like, how do you know it felt good? So there, that's how like I could really get into the therapy. But it's more about like offering this is a space where you're allowed to take space and you're allowed to have opinions and you're allowed to feel safe, right? And that can be a wild experience for someone who is in relationships या फिर जिसको relationally आदत नहीं है to take up space. It's like more like, you know, I guess आप मुझे
Disappear.
बताएं हाँ आप therapist हैं आप बताएं ये मैं I don't know, this is going in too many tangents and my mind is opening too many routes.
Now, everything that you said just brings us to a really great question, which was my next question. What is your philosophy to
Mhm.
therapy? Jahana is going to be like, oh, here we go with other tangents now.
No, I love this. I love this question and I hate it at the same time because I feel like it's constantly evolving, I think.
Yeah.
Um, my philosophy of working with clients is I like to use a lot of relational stuff. I like to notice how the client is making me feel. I like to notice what dynamics are existing between me and the client, because those are dynamics that they are practicing outside the session. In the session, they're apologizing to me. I have people who come in and then they start crying ki mujhe der hogi, late hogi. That's a big psychodynamic thing to explore, why they started crying coming in the session if they were late. What happens when you mess up? What has happened in the past if you've messed up? You know, what
Right.
is your relationship with criticism,
Mm.
right? What is your relationship with apologizing? आप तो इतने जल्दी मुझे sorry कह देते हो, you know? So वो एक पूरा एक relational lens बन जाता है. So my view of working with trauma clients or working with people who are domestic violence survivors is I like to pick up on what is left over of your trauma that is now coming up between my relationship and your relationship. What is manifesting here that I can see manifested in the past or grew in the past as well. So what is between us is something that is a ghost of the past that is existing between us. So I like to kind of notice that ghost and be protective of it and, you know, honor it in some ways. Trauma is stored in the body. I'm a big believer in that. There's a lot of research. Bessel van der Kolk's work is very important for people who are listening. If you want to read a book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's a very good, easy to read. I've not read it.
I've read it.
Book
The
that
body keeps the what?
The Body
Body
Keeps the
Keep.
Score.
Yeah, it's an awesome book. And my niece is doing master's in social work, wants to be a therapist, and she told me she saw the book and she was like, "We read it in our coursework."
Yeah. It's really a wonderful book because it explains how our definitions of trauma have changed so much over time. कहाँ क्या एक explanation थी, like people did bodies, ये जो अब हम बहुत word use करते हैं where we say oh re-traumatization हो गई है. They actually did body scans of people who were made to recall their trauma, and the brain was activating those parts that were actually activated during the trauma. So it was literally like the body was re-experiencing the traumatic event,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So trauma stored in the body. I like to work with people understanding that this is someone who has a misplaced, perhaps, responsibility, has not had a lot of autonomy. Trauma changes your worldview. Grief changes your worldview. So I'm working with people understanding that something has happened that has changed your worldview. My working and understanding of trauma is also, I think, for people listening, like it's not just rape and sexual assault and accident and thappad and marpeet. Trauma is also childhood neglect. Trauma is
Amazing. I
also
was going to
being
ask you that.
misunderstood.
Yeah.
ये मेरा next question था because a lot of our listeners will be like, well, yeah, that's for domestic violence and for rape and all these things, and we get it. But another article that I had read, and I'm sorry I cannot remember it, but I will link it to the blog because I'll find it. And there was an article about ACEs that I had read, and a lot of ACEs don't actually have to do with domestic violence and rape and all that. मतलब और भी चीजें होती है, like childhood neglect, like manipulation, like a lot of the stuff that
Unavailable parents,
हाँ
narcissist
narcissistic
parents.
Oh
parents.
yeah.
और हमारे culture में मुझको लगता है these things are like inherent in parenting, right? Like this is the way that they parent is to be narcissistic. The way that they parent is to manipulate. It's like what they live for. So
Guilt.
Sorry.
You're absolutely right.
Oh,
No. You're spot on. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't
yeah.
mean to cut you off.
So matlab, a lot of the questions that we've had asked, I have, about 25 or 30 people that engaged with me when I was figuring out, like doing the market research on the podcast. And
Yeah.
they engaged with me and they said all of them brought up how to communicate with Desi parents in an effective way. And obviously, when you're dealing with therapy in America, one of the unfortunate parts of dealing with therapy in America is that you tend to have cultural barriers, which Amna and I have discussed, and I think I discussed with you as well, Jahara, separately. Okay, American therapy focuses on, well, draw boundaries, and that's a lovely thing to say to brown people. It sounds fantastic when I'm listening to it, but then I go home and I
Yeah.
try to draw a boundary, which was like many years ago. I tried to draw a boundary, and it was. They looked at me like I had, I don't know what scene coming out of my head. Like, "Tum kya baat kar rahi ho?"
But I think they can be. I've gone through both things. Like I had no boundaries, and then I tried to draw boundaries, and then I'm still told by my relatives who are in mental health field is like you need to do more boundaries. But I feel like now I'm at a balance where I can have some boundaries, and then there are some places where I'm like Geet that I don't want to have these boundaries.
Hey, I have boundaries, certain
Yeah.
boundaries, but I stick up for my boundaries, and they're very specific. It's very specific. There is a certain place where you just do not cross the line, and they respect that. But that's the only boundary that they'll respect. Khair, this is not. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about other people also
Yeah.
feel that they have a big problem drawing boundaries and making therapy work for them. Because if you can't, in essence, draw a boundary, what are we having this conversation for? Like they go back to the therapist, and the therapist says, "Well, did you draw the boundary?" No. Well,
No.
let's talk about why you didn't draw the boundary for the next hour.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
a futile attempt at therapy here. I'm not getting anywhere to solve my issues. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jahara.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. This is one of the most common things that I've heard is this gap that exists between white practitioners working with brown families or white
Yes.
practitioners working with brown kids, right? There's so many things that are different culturally that there's a huge lacking in cultural understanding um, that they cannot understand. हमारे culture में someone who's 30, 40 living with their parents is completely different than someone in America who's 30 and living in their parents' basement,
Right.
right? These are wildly
Yeah.
apart
Yes.
things.
हमारे यहाँ तो it's expected कि यार
So,
जवान लड़की है मतलब शादीशुदा नहीं है and whatever if she's 30 she better be living in this house and in
so
America it's
we have a
entirely
multiracial family. My daughter, her dad's always like, she cannot be living in my basement. And so I tell my daughter that to a certain extent, you can live with me because it's acceptable.
Yeah.
So you have the best of both cultures.
yeah. I mean I did I
Yeah.
lived with my parents well into my 30s and my white friends didn't get it and some of my brown friends didn't get it. They were just like, what are you doing? I mean because they're so ABCD, they're like, why are you still living with your parents, you weirdo? Like, dude, I don't live here long enough to not live with my parents. I'm always out. But
बिल्कुल
मेरा
बिल्कुल.
दोस्त
I think go ahead.
नहीं go ahead. Sorry.
A concept that came to my mind when you were mentioning that was there's this concept in family therapy called differentiation. Have you heard of it before?
No,
Differentiation.
No.
So
no.
in a family, you both grow when you are connected with the clan and you are differentiated. So differentiation is you having कि मुझे understanding होती है at some point that I don't have a symbiotic relationship with my, so we're not connected with the umbilical cord. मैं different हूँ umbilical cord से, मेरी thoughts different है, मेरी needs different है, मेरी values different. वो जो process होता है where that umbilical cord की breakage आप कह लें या where a person is understanding their own needs is called differentiation in family therapy. In a brown context, I think, now this is just my personal professional opinion, there's no research on this, that process of differentiation happens it's very much developmentally delayed in our communities. We growing up with the thoughts and opinions of our parents because they're providing a roof over our head. We have the same political affiliations that our parents do. We have the same views on religion that our parents do. We don't begin to question things till a much later stage where we're like, Acha. And then when we question them, a lot of people that I work with have a lot of inherent guilt. That there's, like your relationship with religion changes over time, your relationship with politics changes, and you don't really know if you're on the right path. हमेशा वो जो पुरानी parent की आवाज है वही ठीक आवाज लगती है, even though you've grown as a person. So I think a concept of boundaries, living in brown cultures, again, back to the, 30, 40-year-olds living in their parents' basement, brown culture is very different than, white culture and white psychology and things on like simply like how you mentioned, I'm not, and the boundary setting is very different. White parent, okay, mom, please don't close the door. I don't like that. It hurts me. You can't freaking do that in a brown family.
No.
Okay, मैं तुम्हें बताऊं जरा दरवाजा बंद करूंगी. मैं बताती हूँ.
दरवाजा बंद क्यों है? क्या कर रही हो तुम?
क्या कर
हो
रही हो
गया
दरवाजा
अंदर?
बंद करके?
हाँ, तो ये डिफरेंस है ना, और ये इसमें है कि there is not enough training. उनकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग नहीं होती. I have my relatives and my sister, and she was working with a white therapist. She said मुझे लगता है कि समझती नहीं है मेरी बात, इसको नहीं समझ आ रहा कि ये चीजें आप नहीं कह सकते या कर सकते. I think there is a massive need for understanding how boundaries can be made in brown households. But I am a crazy optimistaholic, and I really believe that it can be done, and it has been done. But the ways are different. One of the ways that I think comes to my mind through observation is the use of humor. I have seen humor being used to create healthy boundaries or getting in my personal life. And when I have seen people in gatherings, कि वो हंसी मजाक में कहते कि ये ना करें या ये फलाना ये वो, I have seen that work very well sometimes in Desi communities. I have seen, there's another thing that was coming to my mind. Yes, a difference with Desi boundary setting and Valleti boundary setting is also कि आपको बड़ा more obvious होना होता है in that boundary setting. I've lived both for a short period of time in the US and in Pakistan. यूएस में आप थोड़ा सा करो लोग समझ जाते हैं कि अच्छा मैं अनकंफर्टेबल हो रही हूँ. पाकिस्तान आपको ऊंचा मैं अनकंफर्टेबल हो रही हूँ, आपको बहुत चीजें प्रोनाउंस करनी पड़ती है, राइट? आप समझो ये बात. थोड़ा सा ना हमारे लोगों को सटलिटी आई थिंक इतनी समझ नहीं आती, तो वो मेरे ख्याल है थोड़ी सी आपको सटलिटी थोड़ी सी मुंह पे बतानी होती है.
तो जैसे मेरी बेटी कहती है ना, मेरी बेटी कहती है, मॉम you and your friends, you talk very loud, and white household, it's not at all like that. And I was like, you've been there, you know how it is. We have to sometimes get in your face and say, बस कर दो. अगर उनको सटलिटी तो समझ ही नहीं आती ना.
नहीं, मुझे लगता है कि दोनों चीजें सही हैं. Like I feel like subtlety. Here's the thing: boundary setting for me, the experience was that I had to do it in both ways. Sometimes I needed to be quite in your face about it, कि नहीं ये नहीं होगा, and not that I have to be rude or anything. Just like put my foot down and say I'm not listening to this. So the boundary is set, right? That was one way, and the other way was yes, many a times in joking. आराम से कुछ आपने बोल दिया तो वो उन्होंने समझ लिया, and आहिस्ता फिर it's like a work in progress, like you get there eventually. It's not gonna happen like हाँ मैंने दरवाजा बंद कर दिया और आप समझ गए.
नहीं, वो दरवाजा खोल के अंदर आ जाते हैं, वो कहते हैं क्या मतलब है तुम्हारा.
यार मैं जब 14 साल की थी ना, I had a childhood thing when I went through therapy, probably not even therapy yet. It was not therapy yet. Some movie या कुछ मैंने देखा होगा कि when you have unresolved issues, write about it and it'll come out of your. तो मैं लिखती थी journal. Dude, my dad read that journal when I was 14. I never wrote a journal again in my life. Those are the boundaries that they were never there. मतलब मेरी mail खुली हुई होती थी. These are things that were so young before you even start to realize, like you just don't have your autonomy in this, and how that eventually adds to, childhood trauma. I mean, these छोटी चीजें हैं, बहुत बड़ी भी चीजें हैं, but basically stripping you of your autonomy in totality. The little things that lead to bigger things.
So I kind of want to add, ये छोटी चीजें बिल्कुल नहीं है. This is a huge telling of someone कि तुम्हारी privacy is shit. Right? Matter नहीं करती. And this is not the first time I'm hearing a Desi parent reading someone's journal. ये बिल्कुल छोटी चीज नहीं है. I have had many clients tell me that. I can think of a few right now. And this is something where there's some sort of what I always pick from control and some sort of paranoia. Like I want to know kya ho raha hai. I don't know. I don't know, but for lots of people who are brown people in the US also, पेरेंट्स ज्यादा कई दफा ब्राउन हो जाते हैं बाहर जाके भी, या ज्यादा रिलीजियस हो जाते हैं बाहर शिफ्ट करके भी. देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ लाइक, वो हमारे बच्चे ज्यादा वेस्टर्न तो नहीं हो गए, ग्रेस तो नहीं बन गई, या क्या. दिस इज सम ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट you see and you hear and you work with, or like, oh, I want to know what direction you're going in. There's a lot of control, and I think it's hard for a lot of brown families and cultures to see children as their own beings, right? Because they see वही umbilical cord वाला ही है ना, कि I'm constantly seeing you as an extension of myself. Kind of ties in with our ideas of izzat and our ideas of respect and keeping the izzat of the family. How, especially patriarchally, the women, are supposed to hold that. But even with children, it's like, oh, you are holding the respect of your whole family, right? So I want to make sure I keep, as your mom, checking in on you. Okay, are you sure that you are stepping on the, I don't know, the Chenani family's respect or whatever? Just as an example. Okay, are you one of us? हमारे कल्चर में आई थिंक इवन विद लोग क्या कहेंगे, देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ फियर ऑफ इन ग्रुप आउट ग्रुप. ये इन ग्रुप है, दिस इज सेट ऑफ पीपल हु आर एक्सेप्टेड इन सोसाइटी. ये आउट ग्रुप है जिसमें आपका वेदर दैट्स एलजीबीटीक्यू आ जाते हैं, फेमिनिस्ट आ जाते हैं, एथियस्ट एग्नोस्टिक्स आ जाते हैं, या इवन छोटी छोटी चीजें तो बहुत बड़ी बातें हैं, छोटी छोटी चीजों में भी हम आउट ग्रुप लोगों को कर देते हैं कि ये हम यू नॉट वन ऑफ अस, दिस इज नॉट अस. So yeah, I think we're very afraid of losing our sense of community. Historically, अगर उसको देखा जाए, I can also see, because we come from collectivistic cultures where community was dead ass important, right? You survive because there's a sense of community. If you look at sociologically किस तरह हमारी societies बनी, और एक collective society की एक unit होता था, ये हमारा खानदान है, ये unit. So I think perhaps there's also like this fear intergenerationally coming of you have to be in the in group. I mean, in all Desi households, there's a sofa that no one's allowed to sit on. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I want to say something. You're spot on. First of all, I want to say you're amazing. And I want to say, where have you been all my life? You were probably not even you were not even born when I was facing these issues. But a simple thing. It's not even anything. I've always had a huge smile, and I've always had a big laugh, and I was always, by my sisters and my mother, it was always a no thing. हंसना नहीं है, ज्यादा हंसना, तुम बहुत ज्यादा ऊंचा हंसती हो, तुम बहुत ज्यादा खुल के मुस्कुराती हो,
इतनी दांत क्यों दिखा रही हो.
Exactly, it was always like कि तुम बहुत ज्यादा. जब रिश्ते के लिए मैं मानी कि हाँ ठीक है अरेंज मैरिज होगी, तो मैंने कहा कि एक चीज पे आपने मुझे बिल्कुल नहीं मना करना, कि मैं वहां जाऊंगी अगर अंदर कमरे में, प्लीज डू नॉट टेल मी कि मैं मुस्कुरा कैसे रही. और वो फास्ट फॉरवर्डेड टू कि मेरा निकाह हो रहा था, तो मेरी कजन मेरे पास आई और कहती, खालाजान कह रही हैं जरा कम मुस्कुराओ. Because I was always, and then I came to America and I was told I have a beautiful smile and I light up the room. So छोटी छोटी बातें. This is not even any, it's not abuse, or but it's like what we're saying, in group and out group.
Control भी है ना. I'm not. You're sharing something that's so common, और इतनी ये बहुत बड़ी चीज है, because आप किसी को कह रहे हो कि तुम्हारा जीना मैंने हराम किया हुआ है, जब तक एक एक चीज आप छोटी छोटी. और ये स्पेशली विद वुमेन, ये जो पुलिसिंग होती है, even with I think if I talk about like my mom and things that she kind of grew up with, even when her friends or women would get married, you were not allowed, even if you were having sex, you were not allowed to show कि आपको sexual pleasure feel हो रहा है. You had to be like, nahi, nothing, submissive, smiling, sharam, all of those things, because they were conceived as that's a good woman. Because nobody, I don't know what words I'm supposed to use on the podcast. I'm trying to, you're not supposed to be a bad woman is the nicest word I can use, right? Because bad women are in touch with their sexual needs. या ऊंचा हंसती, या ये is an Urdu word, गैर मुहज्जब चीज है इतना ऊंचा हंसना. ये कॉमन चीजें हैं और ये बहुत कंट्रोलिंग चीजें.
Yeah.
Yeah. हाँ, और ये
It's not cultured.
मतलब मेरी भी ड्रेस सेंस ठीक है, मैं ऊंचा हंसती तो खैर शायद थी मैं, लेकिन दांत वात ये वो, एंड आई वाज अ लिटिल बिट रिजर्व्ड. मैं मुंह पे ना 12 बजे हुए होते थे ऑल द टाइम, बेस्ड ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट आई वाज गोइंग. लेकिन आई हैड सर्टेन rebellious characteristics, right? I had like काला धागा पहनती थी और ये वो, तो people would come up, yo, you look like you're really forward, like बड़ी चालू औरत लग रही हो तुम भाई तुम्हें कैसे पता just because I'm wearing a black how did you get चालू
Yeah.
मतलब ये स्टूपिड चीजें होती हैं
Yeah.
हमारे कल्चर में काले धागा पहनने से गले में मतलब आप चालू हो गई या आपने पियर्सिंग एक सेपरेट करवा ली या कुछ भी टैटू लगवा लिया तो ओ you're forward and you're you know you must be like forward कहते हैं easy भी कहते हैं ये क्या होता है
हाँ, easy,
बकवास
easy. I
बकवास
think वो तो यहाँ भी है. I think that's in this culture too. Girls are
हाँ
labeled
कोशिश कर लो
easy.
तुम easy ना बेटा कोशिश कर लो तुम
So right. बिल्कुल. You're so right. There's a sort of जैसे आप सोचिए uniformity में जैसे आप army को नहीं train कर रहे होते कि everyone is good if you look exactly the same. Which also is like a other huge conversation on beauty standards. If I can like personally share, my grandmother had curly hair, and I never knew throughout my bachpan and up to she's passed away as well that she had curly hair. Because one day, because she would like straighten the shit out of it and
हाँ
comb the shit out of it because curly hair का इतनी like it's like an embarrassing thing. जिस तरह हमारा गोरा complex है ना कि आप काले नहीं लगने चाहिए उसको चिट्टे करो. I mean, there is no desi mother who hasn't put something on her child's face बचपन में to make them feel कि ये ज्यादा गोरा होगा या तुम्हारे बाल कम निकलेंगे इस चीज से or whatever that
Yes,
stuff is.
yes.
But even with hair, and I don't know why this is reminding me of suddenly or on another tangent. My grandmother had curly hair, and my mother has curly hair, and my mother straightens them till they are, I'm like, mother, your hair are burning. Stop straightening your hair. And no. She doesn't have acceptance of curly hair. Ab uske andar, yesterday I was thinking that there is no in our culture, especially speaking of Pakistan, सीधे बाल, बड़ी आंखें, पतला नाक, shyness. There is a certain एक like this army type of ये एक hair standard. ये this is beautiful or this is acceptable, and everyone else is okay. They can beautiful too, but this is the high standard. एक सीधे बाल हैं, उसकी बड़ी आंखें हैं, लड़की मुस्कुराती कम है, all of that.
इन्होंने
So
तो ड्रामा भी निकाला है ना
yeah,
पाकिस्तान ने
something
एक
about curly hair.
हाँ ना कोई ड्रामा निकाला है
Yeah,
about a woman with curly hair who then has a child
yeah,
with curly hair and वो सिर्फ उसको लान तान करता रहता है शौहर उसका it was
yeah,
all
yeah,
over the
absolutely,
social media मैंने देखा नहीं है लेकिन वैसे
You, you,
absolutely.
you, you're so amazing. You're actually going into topics that are
that are on
in
our
our
list
future
future में
podcast.
हमारी conversations होंगी
Well,
अच्छा
this is what happens when you speak to brown women. We go off on tangents, but yeah.
आप अपनी दादी की बात कर रहे हैं आपको पता है when I was a child I've had curly hair obviously I was born with you saw my hair it's curly I was born with curly hair I didn't know that until I was 14 they used to tighten
Ah,
इतना टाइट मेरी चोटियां वो बांधते थे कि मेरी
ah,
ponytails would straighten the hair out I would have ponytails long hair
ah,
long no
ah.
idea that it's curly until when I was 14 I went for a perm and my hair ended up like super coily curly and I was shocked and then my mother says तुम्हें मेरे बाल मिल गए मैं कहा आपके भी curly बाल है कहाँ
Mm,
है
mm.
तो
एग्जैक्टली और हमारे स्ट्रेट बाल थे और हम हमारी अम्मी के भी स्ट्रेट बाल थे हमारी अम्मी हमेशा पर्म करती थी और हम भी 14 साल की उम्र से started to perm our hair we wanted
Mm,
curly hair
mm, mm.
so it's I think whatever that's also a brown or desi or South Asian phenomena that whatever you have is not good enough
Mm.
you gotta have something else
आमना एक आपने क्वेश्चन निकाला
हाँ
था ये जो आप बार बार कह रही थी एंड आई थिंक अब तो 45 मिनट्स हो गए हैं तो शायद हम wrap up करें with this last question that is focused on what do you as a therapist find Amna go ahead and read the question I'm sorry
Yeah, so one of our listeners asked this question. Considering that a lot of psychiatric and psychological studies are conducted in Western countries, what conditions, symptoms that affect South Asian women are often misunderstood or even overlooked?
It's a big one. I think one thing that kind of comes to my mind with that is um, depression, a little bit on what I know, is sometimes different in brown communities than it is in white communities. Uh, Do you guys understand Punjabi?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
Amna does and I do a
yeah,
little bit. Go ahead.
so even things like I think हमारे culture में tracking roti नहीं खादी, you know, things like oh, you know, परेशान बैठी हुई है ये फलाना, even हमारे I think somatic pains का जो है ना manifestation, that is more than what sometimes what I have seen. This is just my personal experience in US settings. हमारे somatic pains बहुत होती है. The other thing that's really actually good is कि हमारे लोगों को उसकी understanding भी है, because ये जो पूरा है ना mindfulness and understanding the body and trauma, in the West it's something like maybe like a 10-year-old concept. In the East, people are very much telling you कि ये इन्हें टेंशन सी तो अब इसके साथ में डाल दूंगी या कि इसको अपने मियाँ की फिक्र लगी हुई थी. Or I have heard so many narratives on understanding the relationship between body, mind, and spirit and mental health way more than actually I have had these conversations with mental health practitioners in the US.
And for longer
But
too, right?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like it
And
predates
also,
American um, connections. I feel like it predates it. Like it was even
Mhm.
my grandmother saying it too. I remember her saying things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
and hysterical conversion. When I was a medical student in Lahore, um, we saw so much hysterical conversion, and then I came to US, and you never see it
नहीं, and in
because
Pakistan, जब मैं सिंध में काम कर रही थी ना, then a lot of people in the middle of the floods, a lot of them had lost their livelihoods and their homes and stuff. तो floods में भी बहुत ज़्यादा था prevalent. Like they would come up with
Mm,
psychosomatic, they would come up with
yeah,
physical
yeah.
mhm.
ailments. And when
Yeah.
you try to diagnose it, there is no diagnosis. There's no medical diagnosis. So then it's like, oh, then you give
Mm,
them antidepressants. And they recognize that
yes.
too. A lot of them, even in the गांव level, they recognize कि हाँ शायद हम काम नहीं कर रहे तो इस वजह से शायद हमें कल पता नहीं हो रहा कि क्या हो रहा है तो अब सर में दर्द नहीं जा रहा पीठ में दर्द हो गई है
Mm,
you know
yes,
yeah
yes. There was so my grandmother passed away a year or two after my grandfather passed away. There's different medical reasons to that. She was an old lady. She had also, but one of the ones that I think I kept hearing was कि ये इनके दुख में deteriorate हुई हैं, right? कि
किसके
ये
दुख में
इनकी.
आप कट गई sorry
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
yeah I can hear you but it cut out for a second
They said that after ever since her husband passed away, the
oh
pain and grief of it took over her body more than her physical ailments.
uh,
So she was carrying again वही बात जो बेजल वैंडरपोल की जो मैंने बुक भी सजेस्ट किया the body keeps the score. इसके trauma का और body का बहुत strong relationship है. तो I've even heard now that people were like कि ये आपकी नानी का जो दुख था ना नाना के फौत होने का that kind of came over her and that is also a big part of it. And that's absolutely true. She struggled with her mental. She was grieving a lot in the last year. And of course, mental health का immunity पे फर्क पड़ता है. Immunity का mental health पे फर्क पड़ता है. There are many things that are affected. We have people in chronic pain. You know, people are going through other issues. But I think to kind of sum it up, I have seen personally that in brown cultures, certain presentations of mental health can manifest as physical things. So if there's anyone who is a practitioner or social worker or nurse, doctor who's listening to this, do not take their concerns, like don't just push them aside. Yeah, try to probe further. Send them to trauma-informed therapists and care. और उस चीज को ना करें because medically आपको कुछ गलत नहीं नजर आता, non-epileptic seizures हो रहे हैं, समझ नहीं आ रहा. My supervisor actually is a doctor in so he's not a medical, he works in a hospital, strong hospital in Rochester. His name's Bill Watson. He works with people who have non-epileptic seizures. And मैंने उनके साथ training भी की थी. I used to shadow his work too. So understanding कि आप सोचें basically doing emotional work से लोगों के seizures रुक गए थे. ठीक है? So there's a lot of things जो हमें psychologically trapped wounds की वजह से physically manifest हो रही होती. Right? छोटी चीजें तो वो है ठीक है, energy level नहीं, आज नींद नहीं आई, all of that, that's a separate, वो छोटी सी उसमें तो manifest होती है. But even some things like किसी के आप सोचें seizures रुक गए हैं because we processed a purana trauma.
that's
So
true
physical and mental health is very much interconnected.
that's awesome and that brings episode 4 to an end. Thank you for tuning in. We want to take a special moment right now to extend a heartfelt thank you to Jahara, who was logging in from Lahore, Pakistan, despite load shedding, a choppy internet connection because she had to connect to the mobile, and despite the time difference, was able to come in and meet with us on her day off, and we were able to have this session with her. I have to acknowledge that she is doing very important work, trying to help people work through complex traumas like domestic and child abuse and sexual violence, amongst, I'm sure, many other things. Despite her busy schedule, she took the time out for our listeners, and we highly appreciate that. We hope to have her back on the show again to go deeper in depth and to help guide our listeners. As someone who's been in and out of therapy multiple times in life, I have to say it's really hard to find the proper fit, whether it's a cultural disparity or whether it's the thinking or whether it's someone that you connect with or whether it's their ethics. It was a breath of fresh air to speak to someone like Jahara, who seems to contain all of the things that in a perfect world I would have chosen as my therapist. So thank you, Jahara. And we hope to see you back again soon. Thank you for tuning in. This is your host, Geet, signing off. Until next time.